Good morning to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for October 30th, 2019. Happy Wednesday morning to you. Want to take a look at what's happening out across the tropics today. I say tropics, and that would be basically in terms of what's happening over here in parts of the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea, and over here just to the east of Vietnam, right, and west of the Philippines in that area. That is Tropical Storm Matmo, and we have another cyclone developing just off the coast of India. Then we have this cyclone Kayar, and then in the Atlantic, nothing in the tropics. It's all going to be in the subtropics from here on out, I do believe. We're going to get these storm systems that are forming up here, and we're going to lose the overall energy down here in terms of it being focused and bundled. But wait until I show you the sea surface temperature anomalies chart in just a moment. Nevertheless, we do have invest area 99L from a larger cyclonic overall storm system in the mid-latitudes. Instead of it being under a big anticyclone, which is what we typically see in the tropics, these storms are born out of these larger storm systems, extratropical storms, and they're embedded in a cyclonic flow, which is just weird. It's different, but there's a lot of cold air aloft up there in the higher latitudes, and that creates this instability that you need to generate convection, and lo and behold, you can get some development that resembles tropical storms, subtropical storms, really only an issue for shipping interest and more of a novelty than anything else. So let's move along, checking out sea surface temperature anomalies. Now, this is rather impressive, what we've got going on here across the main development region, right through this area. That's pretty warm, okay, relative to average. And in fact, even up here in the subtropics, pretty warm relative to average. And I'm going to be really curious to see how long this persists. Does it go throughout the winter and into next spring? And if so, you know, it would lay the groundwork for a potentially very busy season next year if all of this energy and warm water does hold on. But we're talking months and months down the road, and a lot of things can happen, as they say. Meanwhile, in the eastern Pacific, the Nino 1.2 area is cooling off again, kind of got this warm look to the Nino 3 area and 3-4. Bottom line, the Pacific really not in a strong El Nino or a La Nina state. It's just kind of warm, neutral. But the North Pacific, very warm compared to normal up here in the subtropics, and that has global weather implications, maybe for the winter coming up, all kinds of things to watch here. But looking at different regions, boy, the Caribbean warmer than average. You folks down in the islands, I know Brent and Timothy, two of our patrons that live down in the Virgin Islands, Carlos over in Puerto Rico. You guys have been telling me about how hot and muggy it is down there all the time. Look at all the warm water temperatures relative to average around your area. The water temperatures down there are already nice, low 80s, right? Now they're a little bit warmer than they should be by a factor of about 1 degree Celsius in some locations. And that doesn't seem like much, but that's a lot more water vapor, a lot more energy put into the atmosphere. And so the mugginess and those hot nights that you just can't get a good, comfortable sleep, that's going to persist if you live down there. And even the Gulf, look at this, all the Gulf of Mexico, warmer than average, warm off the east coast of the United States. I tell you what, if we get cold air involved, which I think we will down here in the lower 48 coming out of Canada, and an active jet stream pattern, you know, big ridge out over the west, and then maybe like a trough over the east as we go into the winter months, it could make for a very interesting storm track if it's along or near the east coast this coming winter. And I do cover winter activity, and I'll talk more about that next week once we get into the month of November. All right, so looking at individual areas real quick, well, there's only one in the Atlantic Basin, and this is Invest 99L, and it's a large gale center, like a large non-tropical low west of the Azores, and it could become a short-lived subtropical cyclone later today or tonight. Then it's going to move over colder water, and I don't care how much cold air aloft you have, if the water underneath a storm system is just too cold, you're just not going to get the convective processes that are needed to classify this as a tropical or subtropical cyclone. And there's the system right there, and you notice it's in a larger cyclonically turning storm system. But right near the middle of it all is this baby. Well, it's not a hurricane yet, but it's a little baby inside the larger storm parent, I guess you'd say. And yeah, look, there is some convection bubbling up through there, owed to the fact that very cold air is in the mid to upper levels. So the colder air, what we call the instability, is easier to achieve. Warm air over warm air does not lead to weather, generally speaking. If everything is equal, then you don't get the differences in temperatures and the other factors that give us our day-to-day weather. The fact that we do have warm air at the surface down here with a relatively warm ocean, it's not like it's frigid, and then cold air aloft, and that colder air is a little bit lower in the atmosphere than normal, you get this instability that gives you these thunderstorms, and it's trying to cluster and bundle around that little area right there, so maybe a subtropical storm for 12 to 18 hours later today. Elsewhere in the tropics, as I was alluding to, the energy is going to become less focused down in the deep tropics. Just a few areas of storms. Look at that nice little flare-up stretched linearly in a line across part of the islands there, but the organized convective season is pretty much over until we get to next spring. We'll have tropical waves that will transverse the Atlantic from time to time, but generally speaking, the upper level winds are going to be screaming out of the west and west-southwest, not allowing anything to develop. That's why we don't have hurricanes typically after the peak of the season, say about October 15th to the 20th. Things really start to calm down. Lower 48 weather, big storm system, lots of cold air, heavy snows in some areas. I will be focusing more and more on winter weather, not just the East Coast, mega blizzards, whatever, those bomb storms that we look for. I'm interested as well in these Midwest storms that we get from time to time. You can have ice storms in Dallas, Oklahoma City, blizzard conditions in the plains, the front range of the Rockies, maybe some lake effect snow events. Thanks to our support from Patreon, I should be able to cover 1 or 2 additional big-ticket weather events this winter that I normally wouldn't be able to cover. And again, I'll talk more about that next week as I outline my plans for the off-season, and then a few things that we will look for as we go into 2020, which is not that far away. We've only got a couple more months, and then the year's over. And boom, we start 2020, and we will be looking for different climate pieces of the puzzle that help us to understand what we might look for next hurricane season. Not there yet, but, that's what we do. We try to keep everybody engaged and give you something to keep your weather obsession alive, because it is interesting, especially, look at this. We're not even talking about the tropics anymore. This is lower 48 weather. And boy, that patchwork, you can tell it's an active weather pattern. In the west here, all kinds of fire dangers, as I'm sure you've heard about. Wind chill advisories, winter storm issues, cold weather all over here. Winter's coming. The old meme, you've seen it a lot of times from Game of Thrones. Not Games of Thrones. Game of Thrones. Yes, winter is coming, and we will be ready for it. Just kind of showing you here, highlighting the fact that, yep, here we go. And even down in the Gulf Coast states, that little disturbance that I talked about earlier several days ago, in fact, let me just run back to the satellite picture real quick. There it is right now, just a little bit of an impulse. If I can get my pointer to come back. Thank you. Little bit of an impulse moving in, much, much, much less organized and concentrated than Olga was. as I said, the later we get into October, the harder it is for these things to bundle. But that being said, pretty good fetch of moisture coming up into the Gulf Coast states there with heavy rain feeding into that storm system out of the tropics and that very, very warm Gulf of Mexico. So real quick, looking at the GFS, the 6Z run from this morning, mainly focus on this little area right here. This is the subtropical storm that's trying to develop out of that larger, and boy, you can really see that cyclonic, I mean, just a huge storm system in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, and in some cases down to the surface. But it's all cyclonic in nature, just a large extratropical, non-tropical, mid-latitude storm system. But fascinating to me, I think it is, hopefully to you, right there in the middle of it all, a little tiny seedling of a subtropical storm trying to get born, as I mentioned, mainly due to the instability of the atmosphere. So if we just kind of scroll around through time, you see that system there. It tries to develop, and then it rapidly dissipates as it goes through the Azores, and then fairly stout Atlantic ridging sets up here over the North Atlantic, troughiness over the lower 48 over here, and no energy to speak of getting together or bundling down in the deep tropics. And you'll notice that as I scroll through, that's 72 hours. We can go out to 96, 120, if this will keep up. And you see generally just straight trade winds from Africa all the way across, if I can draw, through the Caribbean, and no areas coalescing and bundling together. And that's a very typical sign as you leave the tropical cyclone season. And I'll talk about that just a little bit more over the coming weeks. This, again, will die off. This will start to come to life with much more activity in the subtropics and in the mid-latitudes. And then just a few months later, it'll transition back, and we will focus much more on the tropics. So all in all, an interesting weather pattern. Nothing dire, no big problems anywhere. Even the cyclones over off of India in the Arabian Sea and the North Indian Ocean, not a big problem overall. We'll watch those for any potential impacts to the Arabian Peninsula, but I don't see anything that jumps out at me, so that's good. Generally speaking, as we head towards the end of the month, things should quiet down in the tropics, but lower 48 weather going to stay quite active. In fact, for a lot of you, I was noticing, if you follow Zach Fradella down in New Orleans, very popular young meteorologist, and a great guy too. I've known Zach for a long time, probably about 12 years now. Anyway, he was talking about that Halloween in New Orleans could be one of the coldest in decades. That's pretty remarkable. Very cold down there, so get ready for it. All right, that is it from me for today. Got up early, wanted to do an update in the morning, so here you go. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks as always for tuning in. I do appreciate it. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, and I'll be back with more for you probably on Friday.